My husband is a nice guy. I'm 19 weeks pregnant, and I've been plagued by nausea and vomiting almost every night. My husband, Dave, has been really supportive. He wakes up with me, helps me to the toilet, cleans up, and even makes me tea before we crawl back into bed. It's not great for either of our sleep schedules, but it's supposed to get better soon. Dave has always had trouble getting back to sleep once he's awake. Before we met, he dealt with insomnia and bouts of sleepwalking, and those issues still crop up, especially when he's sleep deprived. Lately, he's been talking a lot more in his sleep. I wake up earlier than him, and he's always mumbling stuff. It's mostly random sentences, as if he's at work or gaming with the boys. I've asked him if he remembers what he dreamt of, but he never has any recollection. Yesterday morning, he mentioned several girls' names. It irritated me, and I wrote them down, trying to remember if one of them was an ex. I'm not even ashamed to admit, I even did a bit of Facebook stalking. When I confronted Dave after work, he laughed. He said he had a dream of us trying to come up with girls' names. I pouted a bit, not believing him at first, but he's always so reassuring. We've gone over names, but haven't found one that both of us love. He suggested we should brainstorm 10 names each and see if there's any overlap. This morning, he was mumbling names again. I wrote them all down, considering these might be names he's thinking of. It would be a funny prank if my list of 10 names was full of matches with his. On my drive to work, I always listen to the radio. After the top 5 hits, an announcement came on about 2 missing women. Rachel Moretti and Camila Lopez were last seen Saturday night, said the announcer. The names Rachel and Camila stuck with me, but I couldn't pinpoint why. Pregnancy has made me a bit absent-minded. It wasn't until I was parked that I remembered. Dave had said their names today in his sleep. It's weird how the brain works. I would have missed it if it wasn't for the janitor tearing down old signs from the bulletin board. Under ads about dogs sitting in mattress sales were old missing persons posters. Aaliyah, Destiny, Sunny, each one was a match. A match to the names whispered by my husband while he was asleep. I want to believe it's a coincidence. I want to forget I ever saw those posters, those faces. I knew that black strand of hair on his shirt wasn't mine. The drops of blood on his shoes weren't from a nosebleed. The glob of flesh in the garbage disposal wasn't rancid pork. I knew all of this when I went home tonight and made ribs with green beans. I said, "Till death do us part," and I intend to stand by it. The girl in my class has a third eye. I've only ever seen it open once. Whenever someone asked Lola about the eyelid on her forehead, she wouldn't say anything and distance herself from them. I was probably her only friend, though I really couldn't be called that. I was the only one who didn't ask her. Not because I was mindful, but because I was one of the most introverted sophomores to ever exist. Me and Lola were the type of kids that nobody would notice, not even if we went missing. Her worst enemy was obviously Sean. He was a prime example of humanity's evil. There was a good reason everyone thought he was the reason his baby brother's eyes and heart were found in the river. He never even got detention most of the time. Our school was way too understaffed. Look, it's Grandma Head. Sean would always jeer as he pointed to her cranium. Lola would always have lunch next to me, leading to everyone thinking that we were doing it. Sometimes, her third eyelid would open up just a bit, and you could barely see the black of a pupil staring at you. Yesterday, I was walking home. I was shocked as I caught Lola and Sean behind the school. She shivered silently before Sean. "Come on, wrinkle bitch, open up." He pushed his finger into her forehead, ready to pry her unseen eye open. Thankfully, he didn't see me approaching. When I sunk my knife into his neck, Lola smiled, and I smiled back. "You're gonna help me with the body." For the first time since she started school, Lola spoke. "Don't worry." Then her third eye opened up, but it wasn't an eye. It was a mouth, but it wasn't a mouth. It was an abyss. It wasn't even black, just the color you see when you're blind. The nothingness split out of her head like a biblical flood. Nothing biblical about this, though. God could not have created her. The universe itself could not have created her. My eyes sunk into the nothingness, and my mind reeled into a frenzy of nothing of existence. And then her eye closed, and his body was gone. "Thanks for dealing with him," she beamed. If you listened real closely, you could hear the nothing in her voice. Nowadays, she smiles a little whenever she sees me. I don't smile back. How could I be near something so other? I'm scared of what she could do if she found out. If she found out I was only an opportunist. If she found out who really butchered Sean's brother. If she found out that I walked in on her and Sean for a reason. Most of all, I'm scared of what would happen to me if Sean hadn't been harassing Lola that day. Maria's name. Maria hated her new name. She didn't see why she needed it. She understood that she had to change it to fit into her new school, and she didn't mind most of it. She didn't mind speaking English or hiding the way she looked, and she loved her new first day of school outfit. But a new name seemed silly. "But Mama, you always said my name was beautiful," she reasoned. "It is, darling," her mother pleaded. "Too beautiful. The kids at this school won't understand. Maria is a nice name. It's one of the most common in this world." That didn't make her feel any better, but she eventually agreed to just try. And so the little girl, now named Maria, showed up to the first day at her new school. She wore a pretty red dress with shiny black shoes and a ribbon in her honey-colored hair. All of it brand new and picked out especially for today. She decided very quickly that she liked this school much better than the other ones, because this one had roses growing in the front and a painting of a pack of wolves in the hallway. The other kids liked Maria, and she liked them. They talked about their favorite colors, and though nobody shared or seemed to have heard of Maria's favorite, it was a nice conversation. It had been a long time since she had gotten to be with so many other kids. The teachers, on the other hand, didn't like her very much. They looked at her a bit funny and flinched when she raised her hand. But still, none of them called her anything mean or tried to make her go away. So they were better than the other teachers that she had had before. The one thing that soured the day was the name Maria. It was like the other kids' names, so short and boring. It wasn't hers. It wasn't her. She hated having to write Maria on name tags and folders and such, and having all of the other kids and teachers call her it. It felt like lying, and for no good reason. So, during the last class of the day, Maria stood up on her chair and ignored the teacher telling her to sit back down. "I have an announcement," she said in her biggest voice. "My name isn't really Maria. My real name is..." She said her name. Her real and true name. Her name that could not be written down. It was beautiful. Too beautiful for her human classmates. Some kids screamed, some sobbed, some muttered, "No, no, 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 please." But they all stopped making noises eventually. The teacher fell over, stronger than the children in that he was still breathing, but not strong enough to fully withstand such a name. He hit his head on the desk, and red blood spilled out, just like the blood that came from the other kids' ears. And then the girl who was once called Maria was alone in the classroom. I sent a letter to my dead grandfather. he sent something back. If you ever need help, put a letter in the mailbox, the old woman had said. She was pointing to the old weather-beaten mailbox attached to a post in front of an abandoned house across the street from the park. She'd seen the bruises on my arms and legs while I was playing, which prompted her to stop me and ask if I was okay. I told her I was, and that's when she told me about the mailbox. I didn't think anything of it until 2 weeks later, when my mother's boyfriend broke my arm. He of course said it was an accident, and my mother corroborated his story to the hospital staff. Knowing my mother wasn't going to stand up to him, I decided to write a letter and put it in the mailbox like the old woman had instructed. I wrote the letter to my dead grandfather, who'd passed away 3 years earlier. In it, I told him how much I missed him and how horrible my mother had become. I also gave him detailed accounts of all the times her boyfriend had used me as a punching bag whenever she wasn't around. Putting all of that down on paper actually did make me feel a lot better, which made me wonder if that was the old woman's point. On my way to school, I slipped the letter into the old mailbox, closed it, and raised a flag. When I did, I looked around to make sure nobody was watching me. Then I went to school and put the letter out of my mind. I didn't think about it again until I was on my way home. As I passed the house, I noticed that the flag on the mailbox was no longer up like I had left it. Curious, I peeked inside and was surprised to see that my letter was gone. After closing the mailbox, I looked around to see if anyone was watching me, but I didn't see anyone. I did, however, see the old woman who was sitting on her usual park bench feeding the pigeons. I considered going over to her and asking her if she had taken the letter, but I decided not to. When I got home, I was surprised to see several cop cars in front of my house, along with my mother standing on the porch talking to a couple of officers. She was crying. "I found him like that when I got home," she sobbed. "What's going on?" I asked as I approached the porch. "Oh, honey," my mom wrapped her arms around me. "Somebody killed David." "Do you recognize this, Miss Warren?" A detective had come out of the house holding a clear evidence bag with a bloody belt in it. Attached to it was a huge buckle embossed with a bull. "I recognize it," I replied before my mother could. "That's my grandpa's." "Where is he? We'd like to talk to him." "He's dead," I said. "Forgive me, Father." Father Michael sat in the quiet and dim confessional booth that was surrounded by candles, listening as members of the congregation confessed their sins. It was a routine he had known for many years, and he had devoted his life to the parish. One day a week, he listened to their sins, assigning penance, provided words of praise, but most importantly, he granted absolution. The priest had grown very accustomed to listening to the sins of his people, acting as a gateway between them and Christ himself. Some sins darker than others, but little surprised him anymore. One by one, they would enter the booth, confess through a small lattice separating them from the Father. He would assign an appropriate amount of Hail Marys. They would pray together, ending with a thanks to be God. Then the next person would come in, confess, pray, and leave. It was a pattern that did not break for years. But one afternoon, a new voice broke the familiar rhythm, her hand shaking as she opened the door. She stepped inside and closed the door. She whispered her sins with a tinge of defiance in her tone. She spoke of forbidden intimacy, a reckless love affair. The worst sin of all, she confessed, was that her lover's name was Elizabeth. What came next sent Father Michael into pure rage that proved difficult for him to hide. She has beautiful brown hair that hangs down to the middle of her back. She has told me repeatedly that she is married, but I don't care. Every time I see that little brown mole on the inside of her right hip, it drives me wild, Father. I explore her body, and she has the body of a goddess. Her soft skin feels so warm and loving against mine. There isn't a care in the world when I'm with her. She tells me of her children, Sarah and John. I've heard so many stories of them. I wish I was raising them as my own. I know this is wrong, Father. Please forgive me. Please forgive me, for I have sinned. Father Michael froze, fingers tightening on his rosary beads until they broke. One by one, as each bead hit the floor, she continued as if she was unable to hear the beads hitting the floor, seemingly unaware of the fury boiling on the other side of the screen. He heard the smug satisfaction in her voice as she left, as if she had relieved herself of guilt and expected forgiveness. As if she just didn't confess that she is sleeping with his wife. That night, a darkness gripped him that no prayer could lift. He followed her car home as he watched closely as she left the confessional booth. He found himself outside of her home, watching her shadow move through the windows. Driven by an unholy rage, he broke the back door window, reached his hand through the hole, and opened the door handle from the inside. Walking slowly through the house in search of her bedroom, he found the only door that had light that shone underneath it. Father Michael stood outside the closed door, waiting for that light to go off before he entered. The light went off, and he began contemplating whether he should go through with it. Seconds turned into minutes as he reached behind his back and grabbed the hatchet tucked in his pants. What followed next could only be described as a twisted act of retribution. The door swung open as he lunged forward to her bed and grabbed her by the hand. This hand will never caress another woman. By the mighty hand of God, you will suffer and feel his wrath. Your day of judgment is now, and he has spoken. With the one swift downward motion of his hatchet, Father Michael had cut off the hand of this woman. Her screams desperate and pleading, became like hymns to his ears as he continued. He grabbed her other arm as there wasn't much of a struggle through the screams and started chopping away at the ligaments that held her arm together. Through her screams that became deafening, he leaned over her and said, "God has forgiven you and your sins." Leaving her to bleed out from her wounds, Father Michael walked out of the bedroom and left the house, not before discovering a picture of the woman and his wife that was hanging up by the front door. He grabbed the picture and took it with him. When he returned home, he found his wife waiting for him at the dinner table. Gripping the picture tightly, he threw it at her face, breaking her nose. "God has forgiven your lover, but I haven't. You will not go unpunished. Your betrayal will be forever marked on your soul." As he sat beside her, wiping the blood and tears from her face, he whispered, "Confess to me, my love." And in the silence that followed, Father Michael felt absolution pass over him. An absolution he knew he would never receive.